The diner's fluorescent lights hummed like a low, impatient insect, and the late-night patrons clustered in their booths, as if proximity could staunch the sudden, awkward cold. She sat alone at the far window, a silhouette against the rain-slick street, a woman whose stillness made the room hold its breath. When the first fist connected, it sounded small, crisp, intimate, yet it opened the air like a blade. Coffee trembled. A napkin fluttered. The sound of flesh on cheek hung over the room with the awful clarity of something irreversible. He had the swagger of someone who assumed the world gave him favors. He had the weight of drunk confidence and the kind of smile that looked for an opening. The men with him leaned back, the cheap laughter of people who believed their numbers meant safety. She did not flinch. The cut on her lip bled, a thin red that traced the angle of her mouth, but her gaze was steady, measured, an animal that had been trained to wait for the perfect instant to move. She had learned the language of violence years before, in places most people refused to imagine. Her hands rested on the tabletop, fingers curled around a chipped ceramic mug as if it were an anchor. The other man expected a reaction, shouts, tears, the petty theatrics of humiliation. He expected to be the one to write the evening's script. Instead, he was met with the silence of someone who had navigated storms far worse than quick, angry hands. That silence rearranged the room. Conversations died mid-sentence. The smell of frying oil and bleach mixed with rain and something else. Tension, raw and metallic. Her body had been forged in endless repetition. The rhythm of commands, the cold bite of ocean spray at dawn, the slow burn of exhaustion that never meant surrender. She had carried things men seldom spoke of. The dead names like stones in pockets, the precise motions that turned fear into survival. But here, in this small, cheap world of vinyl booths and neon hours, she did not want to fight. She only wanted an acknowledgement, a truth to be faced. The slap wasn't random. It had a name, an old ledger of guilt and cowardice that caught up with some men in the worst way. In the mirror, when she moved, it was not a burst but a cascade, clean, inevitable. Her hands closed on the man's arm in a twist that looked casual until Bone complained. His head met the counter with a finality that stole his breath. His friends surged, a reflex of anger and embarrassment, but she cut them off like a tide rolling back. A forearm under a jaw, a planted foot, a measured push. The choreography was precise, practiced, not for spectacle, but to end threat without turning the room into a battlefield. Within seconds they were down, heavy and startled, and suddenly aware of how fragile their bravado had been. She crouched by the first man the way someone speaks to a child, soft, direct, then let silence fill the place of accusation. The waitress hovered, face pale, hands trembling, and the trucker in the corner stayed very still, eyes wide. No one applauded, no one yelled. No one yelled. There was only the slow reorientation of people being forced to revise what they thought they knew about the world, and the quiet, binding verdict of someone who had carried a different kind of authority for a long time. From her jacket she took a folded photograph, edges softened by years. The picture showed 3 men in uniform, young and unguarded, smiles that didn't understand the gravity of what they had chosen. One of them lay on the diner floor now, groaning and blinking through the blur of pain. The photograph was a key she turned deliberately in an old lock. The face she knew best in that picture, the one who had convinced the world he was invincible, was gone. The one left behind in the dust of a foreign land had been her brother. She had spent years cataloguing absence. War had taught her to weigh every second, to measure risk and consequence in breaths and beats. Her brother's voice still lived in the small spaces of her memory. Raucous, irreverent, the kind that filled rooms and ignored danger. He had made a mistake and paid in a country where the rules were written in sand and blood. She came home with the echo of his last moments, folded into her marrow, and a ledger of people who turned away when courage was required. Some names blurred into others until the edges of truth were softened by bureaucracy. Official pages labeled events with euphemism and omission until the facts hid like contraband. The man on the floor reached toward her, breath shallow, regret finally crossing his features. She placed the photograph on his chest as if it were an indictment. Her voice was level. There was no triumph in it, only the precise weight of a verdict rendered. He tried to meet her eyes, to make the wrongs small with excuses, but the calories of those pleas were spent. She turned away. Outside, the rain had become a steady curtain, each drop marking the passage of a night that had been changed. Somewhere in her past was a moment of broken faith, orders disregarded, a retreat that had meant a life lost. She had asked for answers and found forms stamped and sealed. Justice moved like molasses inside formal systems. Sometimes it never came at all. That was why she had learned another language, one that spoke in quiet reconnaissance, in tracking down worn addresses and unremarkable men who thought their pasts could be kept in the back of someone's mind. She had shadowed the footprints of forgetfulness until memories knew they were being watched. At the diner's doorway, the owner, hands wrapped in flour-stained paper towels, watched her with an expression that mixed fear and gratitude. She declined calls to the police with a soft shake of her head. Compulsion to escalate to uniforms had been tempered by a long acquaintance with how little systems sometimes did. She wanted the man to feel the weight of what he had done, not to be hidden away behind badges and reports. That was a dangerous thing. Justice wielded without ceremonial backing, but she had always accepted danger the same way she accepted loss, as part of the shape of a world that often failed the vulnerable. When she left, the rain found her like old truths. Her steps were even as she crossed the parking lot, the streetlights making the wet asphalt shine like spilled mercury. In the car, she sat with the photograph open on the passenger seat, fingers tracing the faces, until the image bled into a map of memory. She thought of the way sunlight had cut across the desert when they'd gone in, blinding at first, then merciless. She thought of the slow hollow that had hollowed out inside her, a grief not meant to be shared. She drove until the city breathed out into less light, until the sea spread wide and black on her left. The cliff where she stopped looked out over the ocean as if the world ended there, all raw and salt and indifferent horizon. She smoked a cigarette she didn't need and let the nicotine burn like a small, controlled pain. It steadied her, not because she sought comfort in destruction, but because ritual held her in a life that often felt like a series of unaddressed endings. Her brother's dog tag rested in her palm. She ran a fingertip over the stamped letters and numbers. It was a small, cold thing that fit the curve of the hand like a promise. She went over the last conversation in her mind until she could no longer tell whether it was memory or a rehearsal. He had told her once, with drunken softness, that fighting without meaning was arrogance. He had believed in endings that were clean, in heroic myths that rarely matched the smell of real loss. She had watched him step into the muddy teeth of a mission and never step back. It defined her. His absence shaped the reaches of her life with its blunt geometry. When dawn came, it painted the sea with reluctant gold. Sirens sounded dimly inland like an afterthought. Footage from the diner would find its way into trending reels and moral arguments. The world would split into camps, some calling for punishment, others for praise. Those who had lived under the same stars and carried the same ghosts would see the lines on her face and know what she had been trying to repair. The rest would argue about legality and spectacle. She didn't wait to read their verdicts. She folded the photograph and slid it into the pocket nearest her heart, as if to keep the memory from evaporating. Then she drove again, toward places that asked little of vanity and much of courage, toward the kinds of people who couldn't shout their truths into comment sections, but whose lives depended on people who could make hard choices. She had learned to let the storm carry away the need for applause, and understood that some resolutions didn't need an audience, only finality. The rain didn't stop that night. It followed her, soft, relentless, cleansing nothing. Rachel drove through the dark until the highway turned into narrow rural roads, where only the hum of tires and the low pulse of thunder filled the space around her. The world outside the windshield blurred into streaks of gray and blue, and she wondered if this was what penance looked like, motion without destination. Her body hurt in small, familiar ways. A bruise along the jaw, stiff fingers, the faint ache in her shoulders. But that wasn't the pain that gnawed at her. It was the echo of what had lived in that diner. The look on his face when recognition had finally cracked through his arrogance. It hadn't been about her gender, or strength, or even control. It was about memory. He had seen her brother in her eyes, and it terrified him. The truck stop neon faded behind her, replaced by the deep dark of the coastline. She stopped only once, to buy gas and cheap coffee. The clerk recognized her from somewhere, though he couldn't place it. There was a tremor in his politeness, the kind people offered to someone who might be dangerous. She didn't correct him. When she reached the motel on the edge of a forgotten town, she parked in the far corner where the streetlight didn't reach. She checked the windows, then the mirrors, before she entered. Habit, not paranoia. The habits kept her alive long after luck stopped trying. Inside, the room smelled of damp carpet and chlorine. She peeled off her wet jacket and set the pistol on the table beside the door. Its weight was comforting in a way she wished it wasn't. The mirror across from the bed caught her reflection, hair clinging to her skin, the line of a fading scar across her neck. She stared at herself as if trying to find the woman she had been before she learned how easily things break. The television flickered to life on its own as she brushed her hair back. Some late-night broadcast replayed footage from the diner. The video was grainy, but clear enough. A headline scrolled across the bottom: Navy SEAL veteran in altercation, hero or threat. Her name wasn't there yet, but it would be. It always surfaced. She turned the sound off, watching her own movements on the screen like she was a stranger. The news anchor's silent mouth-shaped words she already knew. Violence, justice, recklessness, hero. They said everything but the truth. She turned the screen off and sat on the edge of the bed, head bowed, fingers pressed against her temples. The years she'd spent in the teams came back, not in images but sensations. The weight of gear against her shoulders, the crush of mud, the dry rasp of dust in her throat. Every mission carried its ghosts. Some she'd buried, some she couldn't. Marcus had been one of those ghosts, the only one she hadn't learned to live without. She opened her duffel and took out a small metal case, one she had carried across continents. Inside were fragments: a torn map, a folded letter, a single shell casing engraved with a name. Marcus's name. It had been recovered from the ambush site years ago, along with 4 other casings. 3 had come from friendly rifles. That truth had been the first betrayal. Rachel leaned back, staring at the ceiling. The motel fan ticked in slow rotation, whispering the same rhythm as the rotor blades that used to haunt her sleep. She'd chased the details for years, following leads through silence and denial. The man in the diner had been one of the last. But there were still others. Names that had vanished into the black economy of private contracts and shadow wars. She couldn't let it end there, not yet. Her phone buzzed once, an encrypted signal from an old contact. She hadn't spoken to him in over a year. The message was brief. They know what you did. Get ahead of it. She read it twice, then erased it. No panic, no surprise. This was the rhythm of her life. One step ahead of men who wanted her silenced. Not because of what she'd done, but because of what she knew. Rachel reached for the dog tag she wore under her shirt and closed her hand around it. One more time, she murmured to no one. Then I'm done. The morning brought the smell of salt air and the sound of gulls circling the cliffs. She showered in cold water, dressed and cleaned her weapon with ritual precision. By the time the sun rose, the decision was made. She would go to Norfolk. She would confront the one man who could still tell the truth, their old commanding officer, Commander Harris. He had been Marcus's mentor, her own advocate, and later, the man who had ordered the files sealed. If there was still any decency left in the system, he was the only one who could prove it. The drive took most of the day. By afternoon, the military base appeared through fog and fences, familiar, sterile, suffocating. She parked just outside the gate and watched the sentry booth from a distance. The air smelled like diesel fuel and salt. Her mind drifted back to Marcus again. How he used to talk about brotherhood, about the code they lived by. "We don't leave anyone behind," he used to say. It had sounded so simple then, when honor was still a word that meant something. Rachel stepped out of the car and walked toward the checkpoint. Her boots crunched against gravel. The young Marine at the gate looked up, confusion flickering over his face as he read the ID she handed him. He hesitated, then made a call. Minutes later, a black SUV rolled up from the inner lot. A man stepped out, tall, broad, his hair gone white around the edges. Commander Harris. His expression carried the same controlled disapproval she remembered from briefings. But his eyes were older. He said her name softly, like an accusation wrapped in concern. Rachel, she stood still, rain beginning to fall again, washing the dust off her jacket. "You sealed the report," she said. "I did what I had to do. You did what they told you to." The silence between them was heavy. Then, slowly, he gestured toward the vehicle. "Get in. You shouldn't be here." Rachel looked past him toward the horizon, where the base met the sea. The same sea she had trained in, the same water she had almost drowned in a dozen times before earning the right to wear the trident. "I'm done hiding," she said quietly, "but I'm not leaving without the truth." Harris's jaw tightened. He opened the door anyway, and as she stepped inside, the rain began again, gentle, endless, the sound of something that couldn't wash away what was already written beneath the skin. The SUV's engine hummed low as it rolled through the base. Rachel sat in the back seat beside Commander Harris, watching the landscape pass by in silence. Rows of barracks, training fields, and shooting ranges blurred by rain. Everything looked exactly the same as the day she left, yet everything inside her had changed beyond repair. Harris's profile was rigid, that of a man trained to control even his thoughts. His knuckles tightened around the steering wheel, the way soldiers do when they're bracing for an explosion they can't stop. Rachel finally spoke. Her voice was steady, but each word carried years of buried rage. "You lied in the report. You said Marcus died during a failed extraction. Enemy ambush, no survivors. But I found the ballistics. 3 rounds came from our own rifles." Harris didn't flinch. He kept his eyes on the road ahead, water streaking down the windshield like thin scars. "You shouldn't have gone digging, Rachel." "I had to." Her tone sharpened. "He was my brother." The words hung in the air, raw and unhealed. Harris exhaled, slow and deliberate. "I did what was necessary to protect what was left of us." The mission went sideways. We were in black territory. There were no clean options. "Clean," she turned toward him. "You call executing your own man clean?" His silence was answer enough. They stopped outside an old, decommissioned hangar on the far end of the compound. No markings, no security cameras. The kind of place meant to disappear between budgets and classified files. Harris stepped out first and gestured for her to follow. Inside, the air was cold and metallic. A few scattered crates, a table, 2 chairs, and a stack of old personnel files. Harris locked the door behind them. "You remember Operation Echo Lance?" he asked. Rachel's heartbeat slowed. She hadn't heard that name in years. "Of course, we were supposed to extract an asset from an insurgent cell in the mountains. Marcus was lead." He nodded. "That's what you were told. But it wasn't an insurgent cell. It was a weapons broker we'd been using. One of our own informants. He was about to go public with evidence of a covert op we weren't supposed to run. Marcus found out. He tried to pull the team out." Rachel's throat tightened. "And you silenced him." "I contained the situation," Harris said evenly. "If the truth had come out, the entire SEAL division would have been disbanded. You know what that means for every man who served." She stared at him in disbelief. "You talk about the unit like it's sacred. But it was never about loyalty, was it? It was about control." Harris looked tired. Not remorseful, but burdened. "You think I liked it? You think I slept after that? I've carried this longer than you know. I protected you, Rachel. You weren't supposed to find out." She stepped closer, her voice trembling. "You protected them. The ones who gave the order. The ones still profiting off the blood of soldiers who never came home." He didn't deny it. Instead, he pulled out a small data drive and set it on the table. "Everything you're looking for is here. the mission logs, the command chain, the signatures. But you need to understand something. Once you take this, there's no coming back. They'll hunt you. They already are. Rachel's gaze locked on the drive. It looked so small, so harmless, yet she could feel the weight of lives inside it. Her hands shook as she picked it up. You kept this all these years. Why? Because one day I knew you'd come, Harris said softly, and because part of me hoped you'd destroy it. End the cycle. Rachel looked at him, searching for the man she once respected. I can't do that, he sighed. Then you're just like him. She turned away, blinking hard to keep her eyes from burning. He died for the truth. I'm not letting that be erased. As she slipped the drive into her jacket, a loud thud echoed outside the hangar. Harris froze. The sound came again, boots on wet concrete, then a metallic click. He drew his pistol. They followed you. Rachel's instincts took over. In one motion, she pulled her side arm and ducked behind a crate. The door burst open, and two men in tactical gear stormed in, moving fast and silent, too professional to be base security. Private contractors. Gunfire erupted. The first burst shredded the edge of the table where the files were stacked. Papers scattered like snow. Rachel returned fire, dropping one of the men instantly. Harris took a hit to the shoulder and stumbled, blood blooming through his sleeve. Rachel dragged him behind cover, her voice sharp. Who are they? Cleaners, he grunted. They're here to erase the evidence. Then we don't let them. The last operative flanked right, moving through the shadows. Rachel waited. One breath, two, then rolled out, firing 3 rounds. Silence followed. The echo of gunfire faded, replaced by the soft drip of rain through the broken skylight. Harris slumped against the wall, clutching his arm. You always were the better shot, he muttered through clenched teeth. Rachel crouched beside him. We need to get you to med-evac. He shook his head. No time. Take the drive. Get to D.C. There's someone there you can trust. Colonel Avery. He knows what happened but couldn't speak up then. He'll help you expose it. Harris. He grabbed her wrist, his grip still iron strong. Don't waste it like I did. Finish it. Rachel hesitated, then nodded once. I will. She stood, holstered her weapon, and looked around the ruined hangar one last time. The walls echoed with memories. Briefings, laughter, the ghosts of the men who once stood there believing in something pure. As she stepped into the rain again, she didn't look back. The world outside felt colder now, but her purpose burned hotter than ever. She had the truth, and she knew exactly what it would cost to reveal it. The storm had only begun. Night had settled thick and heavy by the time Rachel reached the edge of the base. The rain had turned into a relentless downpour, each drop slicing through the air like falling shards of glass. Her SUV, borrowed from the motor pool, sped down the deserted access road, headlights cutting narrow tunnels through the darkness. Her heart thudded in rhythm with the windshield wipers. The data drive pressed cold against her chest beneath the jacket, a silent reminder of the lives tethered to it. The truth, a truth men had killed for, was now in her possession. In the rearview mirror, distant headlights appeared, one pair, then another. She didn't panic. Panic got soldiers killed. Instead, she assessed. No license plates, high beams on, tactical pursuit pattern. Contractors again. The cleaners hadn't failed. They'd simply regrouped. Rachel pressed the accelerator, feeling the tires slip slightly on the slick asphalt. The SUV fishtailed before finding traction. Ahead, the road wound through dense pine forest, miles of shadow and silence. She turned off her lights and veered left onto an unmarked service path. The sudden darkness swallowed her whole. For 5 miles, she drove blind by instinct and memory. She'd trained in this kind of terrain. Blackout navigation, vehicle evasion, no comms, no backup. Every rustle, every whisper of wind carried meaning. When she finally stopped, the forest around her seemed to breathe. Rachel stepped out, boots sinking slightly into the wet earth. The rain masked her movements, her breathing, her scent. Somewhere behind her, the low growl of engines grew louder, hunting, sweeping. She slipped into the trees, moving with practiced silence. Her eyes adjusted, mapping the terrain, uneven ground, fallen branches, a ridge ahead. She climbed, body fluid and controlled, every movement purposeful. Her mind replayed Harris's last words, Colonel Avery in D.C., like a mantra. She reached the ridge and crouched low. Through the tree line below, she saw 3 vehicles moving in formation. Men with night vision goggles scanned the woods with infrared beams. They were methodical, trained, efficient, but not like her. Rachel removed her jacket and smeared mud across her face and hands, dulling her heat signature. She checked her sidearm, half a clip left. The rain muffled her steps as she circled downslope, flanking the pursuers. The first man broke formation, moving toward a cluster of rocks. She waited until he passed, then reached out silently, pulled him backward by the collar, and drove her knife through his vest seam. The body dropped without a sound. The others didn't notice, too focused on their scanners. Rachel dragged the man's body behind a fallen log, stripped his calm earpiece, and listened. Team Bravo to command. No visual yet. Tracks end near grid 9. A pause. Then another voice, cold and precise. She's trained SEAL. Expect silent kills. Use thermals. No mercy. Rachel's jaw tightened. Whoever was issuing orders knew exactly who she was. She whispered under her breath. Then you know how this ends. A memory surfaced. Marcus's last words before his final mission. If you're ever surrounded, don't fight their way. Make them play your game. She slipped into the darkness again, using the forest as her weapon. One by one, the men disappeared, disarmed, disabled, silenced. Each takedown was quick, surgical, emotionless. She wasn't killing for revenge anymore. She was surviving for purpose. When only one operative remained, he panicked, firing blindly into the trees. Rachel moved behind him, her breath steady, heart cold. She pressed her pistol to his temple. "Who sent you?" she asked quietly. He hesitated, trembling. Not Harris. Higher, D command. They said you were a liability. They said. The shot cut his words short. She didn't need to hear the rest. By the time the last echo faded, the forest was still again. Only the rain spoke, washing away the blood, the footprints, the traces of her presence. Rachel knelt beside one of the fallen men and searched his gear. Inside his vest pocket, she found a sealed envelope wrapped in plastic. Orders. She tore it open. Inside was a photograph. Hers, taken 2 days ago outside the diner. Beneath it, a single line printed in bold. Eliminate asset before exposure. Authorization D17. Her stomach turned. D17. She knew that code. The same man who'd overseen Operation Echo Lance. They weren't just cleaning up the past. They were cleaning her. Rachel stood, her pulse steadying as purpose burned through the exhaustion. She was no longer the hunted. She was the storm they thought they could contain. She retrieved a satellite tracker from one of the fallen agents and rerouted its frequency, masking her signal. Then she headed north, toward an abandoned airstrip she'd used during training years ago. There, she could get transport out of the state. The forest stretched endlessly before her, black and indifferent. But for the first time, Rachel didn't feel lost. She was on the offensive now. As dawn crept over the horizon, painting the mist in dull gray, she looked back once, at the woods that had swallowed her enemies whole. A whisper of wind brushed through the trees, almost like a farewell. She murmured, more to herself than the ghosts behind her. You thought you could bury the truth. You forgot who digs deeper. Then she turned east, toward Washington, toward the reckoning. She walked for hours before the forest gave way to open road. The cold light of morning revealed the first signs of civilization. A gas station, a half-broken payphone, the quiet hum of power lines overhead. Rachel used the payphone, her fingers shaking slightly from the cold. She dialed a number she hadn't used in years, a secure line to Colonel Avery's last known contact hub. The voice on the other end was older, tired, but unmistakable. "Who is this?" "It's Kane," she said. "Rachel Kane. We need to talk." A pause, then a sigh. "I was afraid I'd hear from you one day." "Someday. I'm coming to D.C., she said. "They're already moving against me." "I know," he replied. "They started the sweep last night. You're on every list that matters. Then you know why I can't stop." There was a long silence. Finally, Avery spoke. "Meet me in 36 hours. Same place Marcus used to run drills." If you make it that far. The line went dead. Rachel stared at the phone, rain dripping from her hair onto the receiver. She closed her eyes for a brief second, breathing in the damp scent of earth and metal. Then she dropped the phone and started walking. Every step carried her closer to the heart of the storm, and deeper into the truth Marcus had died to reveal. The world was about to remember his name and her. By the time Rachel reached Washington, the city was waking under a gray, sleepless dawn. The air carried that heavy urban chill, exhaust, rain, and faint coffee from early cafes. Every building loomed like a fortress. She wore a nondescript hooded coat, her uniform long gone, but the military posture never left her. Even in disguise, her eyes scanned reflections, doorways, and blind corners. She knew D.C. too well, a city built on secrets, where silence was currency and truth could kill faster than a bullet. Her contact with Colonel Avery was buried deep in an encrypted chain. But the drive, the tiny device inside her jacket, was still intact, holding files that could rip apart decades of fabricated history. She moved through the subway station, blending with the morning rush. Commuters brushed past her, eyes fixed on phones and screens. No one noticed the woman who walked as if every step was measured between life and death. At the far end of the platform, a man waited, older, tall, his grey coat unbuttoned despite the chill. Colonel Avery, his face looked worn by years of service and guilt. When he saw her, his expression didn't show surprise, only resignation. "Rachel," he said softly, "you look like you've walked through hell." She gave a small, humorless smile. I stopped counting the fires. They moved to an empty service stairwell, the hum of the city echoing above them. Rachel handed him the drive. "Everything's here. The Black Ops funding trails, the weapon shipments, the ghost missions, and the truth about Echolance." Avery turned the drive over in his hand as if it were a relic from a darker faith. "You realize what this means? If we release this, we don't just burn a few corrupt officers. We burn the entire command tree, senators, defense contractors, intelligence chiefs. The Navy will fracture." Rachel met his gaze. "Then maybe it should." Avery sighed. "You sound like Marcus." Her voice cracked. "I sound like someone who buried him." He looked away for a moment, as if steadying himself against the tide of memory. "I tried to protect what I could, Rachel. You know how the system works. You fight it head-on. It eats you alive. I'm not afraid to be eaten," she said quietly. "I'm afraid to let them keep feeding." The old man studied her. The lines around his eyes, carved from too many compromises. "If you hand this to the wrong people, it disappears. The media's too controlled, the politicians too bought. We'd need something bigger, something public, irreversible." Rachel thought for a moment. "There's one place it can't be buried, the Memorial Tribunal." Avery hesitated. "That's classified hearings, Rachel. They'd detain you before you reach the gates." "Then I won't knock," she said. Before he could reply, a faint vibration buzzed in his coat pocket. He checked his secure phone, and his face drained of color. "They found us," he whispered. Rachel turned sharply. Through the reflection of a glass panel, she saw two men moving down the stairs. Dark suits, tactical posture, federal, not local. "Go," Avery hissed. "I'll stall them." She gripped his arm. "Not again." He smiled faintly. "It's my turn to clean up what I started." Rachel hesitated, then slipped the drive back into her pocket. "You said Marcus would be proud of me once. Tell him he was wrong." "I'm not done yet." She disappeared down the lower corridor, just as the men entered. Avery straightened, facing them with the calm of someone who'd already chosen his fate. Rachel emerged onto the street above, blending into the crowd again. Sirens wailed faintly somewhere behind her. Every fiber of her training screamed to run, but she didn't. She walked, steady, deliberate, a ghost among the living. She knew where she needed to go. The Memorial Tribunal stood across the river, a marble monument disguised as a courthouse, guarded by layers of bureaucracy and soldiers who thought they were protecting justice. Inside those walls, sealed hearings decided the future of men who never existed. If Rachel could get the files on record there, they'd enter the official archive, immune to deletion. Even the highest clearance couldn't erase a documented tribunal submission. But getting inside meant walking straight into the jaws of the system she was defying. By nightfall, Rachel reached the outskirts of the complex. She sat inside an abandoned parking garage, cleaning her sidearm, reloading the last magazine she owned. Her reflection in the rearview mirror looked foreign, wet hair plastered to her face, eyes hollow but burning. The storm outside mirrored the one inside her. She thought of Marcus, his laugh, his steady hand on her shoulder before his last deployment. If the world ever forgets what we fought for, he'd told her, make them remember. She whispered those words now, letting them anchor her. The sound of approaching footsteps made her tense. A figure stepped into the dim light. Not a soldier, but a civilian woman in plain clothes. Mid-30s, sharp eyes. Rachel raised her weapon instantly. Name. The woman lifted her hands. Detective Mara Ellison, Internal Affairs, off-duty. Colonel Avery sent me. Rachel lowered the gun slightly but didn't relax. He's alive, for now, but they're closing in fast. He told me to help you finish it. Rachel studied her face, calm, resolute, unflinching. Why risk your badge for this? Mara met her gaze evenly. Because my father died on one of those ghost ops. Official report said training accident. I stopped believing in their truth a long time ago. For a long moment, neither spoke. Rain thudded on the concrete above them. Finally, Rachel nodded. Then we moved tonight. They left the garage under cover of darkness, blending into the storm. Every security light, every checkpoint became a silent enemy. Rachel's old instincts reawakened, the ghost mode of a seal on hostile ground. They breached the perimeter through a maintenance tunnel, emerging inside the tribunal's lower archive hall. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead. The walls smelled faintly of old paper and iron. This is it, Mara whispered. If we upload the drive to the internal server, it auto-archives within 30 seconds. Rachel inserted the drive. The screen came alive, rows of classified files spilling open like wounds. Mission reports, casualty lists, signatures of men who'd ordered deaths with a keystroke. She felt her breath catch. Marcus's name appeared. Status, Kia-friendly fire. Authorization, D-17. Her vision blurred. For a moment, she wasn't the soldier anymore. She was the sister standing over an empty grave. Rachel, Mara said gently, it's time. Rachel nodded and pressed upload. The progress bar crawled upward. 20%, 40, 60. Then the power flickered. The screen went black. No, Rachel whispered, hitting the console. No, no, Mara cursed. Backup generator, someone's cutting us off. Rachel drew her weapon, scanning the corridor. Footsteps echoed, measured, deliberate. She recognized that stride. A man stepped into view, flanked by two operatives. Gray hair, black suit, cold, calm eyes. The deputy director himself. Lieutenant Kane, he said evenly, you should have stayed buried. Rachel aimed her pistol straight at his chest. And you should have stayed human, he smiled faintly. You think the truth will save you. You think the world wants to hear what we did to keep it safe. Maybe not, she said, voice like iron. But they'll hear it anyway. Behind her, the console flickered back to life, 90%. The deputy director saw it, eyes narrowing. Stop her. The two operatives raised their weapons. Rachel fired first, precise, deadly, silent. They fell before they could pull the trigger. The director stepped forward, unarmed, his expression unreadable. You were my best soldier, Kane. You could have had a life. I did, she said coldly. You took it. A single shot echoed through the hall. He fell. Rachel turned back to the console. Upload complete. The system flashed confirmation. Files auto-archived. Classified seal verified. It was done. Her hands trembled. For the first time in years, the weight on her chest lifted, only to be replaced by something colder. Outside, alarms blared. She and Mara ran through the labyrinth of corridors, emerging into the storm. Rain lashed against them as red lights flared across the compound. Mara grabbed her arm. You did it. It's out. Every file, every lie. It's over. Rachel looked up at the sky, the rain washing blood from her hands. No, she whispered. It's just beginning, because she knew, for every truth set free, there would be those who'd try to bury it again. But this time, the world would know her name. Rachel Kane, the woman who made the system bleed. Morning crept through the haze of sirens and rain. The tribunal compound was sealed, surrounded by emergency vehicles and tactical teams, their flashing lights painting the wet concrete in fractured color. The storm had finally broken, but the chaos it left behind was only beginning. Rachel and Mara stood on a nearby rooftop, watching the flood of officials swarm below like ants over a wounded empire. The upload had gone global. Copies of the files distributed automatically through secure watchdog servers and whistleblower networks. Every news outlet from Washington to London was broadcasting fragments of what Rachel had unleashed. Unauthorized assassinations, falsified missions, black site operations buried under patriotic slogans. The world was learning the truth. Rachel's hood clung to her hair, soaked through. The wind cut cold against her skin, but she didn't feel it. Her gaze was fixed on the cityscape. The marble spires, the faceless windows, the monuments that once meant something sacred. They looked different now, smaller. Mara leaned beside her, breathing hard. "We did it. You actually did it." Rachel didn't respond. Her hands were trembling, not from cold, but from the weight of what couldn't be undone. Behind her, distant explosions of sound, the echo of protests already rising in the streets. The truth had detonated louder than any bomb. Politicians scrambled to contain it. Generals issued statements of national concern. The machine was eating itself alive, but victory felt hollow. Rachel had seen too much to mistake exposure for justice. She knew there would be hearings, resignations, scapegoats. Yet the men who designed these systems rarely fell. They simply adapted, rebuilt the walls tighter, quieter. And Marcus was still gone. Her eyes drifted toward the sky where the clouds were beginning to thin. She whispered his name, not as a prayer but as a promise kept. "It's done, brother." Mara stepped closer, voice low. "What will you do now?" Rachel let the silence linger before answering. "Disappear. You don't have to. The public's on your side. You could testify, clear your name." Rachel turned toward her, a faint, tired smile tugging at her lips. "There's no clearing my name. I broke every oath they made me swear. The system I exposed is the same one that trained me. To them, I'll always be the traitor who shot her own command." Mara frowned. "You did what was right." Rachel looked out at the chaos below. Sometimes right doesn't fit neatly in a report. A long moment passed before Mara nodded. "Then at least let me help you disappear." They left the rooftop just as the first helicopters began to circle overhead. By noon, Rachel was gone from every camera, every record, every trace of surveillance. 3 weeks later, the world had changed, or at least pretended to. The hearings began under heavy security. High-ranking officers were suspended. The name Operation Echo Lance was splashed across headlines like a ghost finally dragged into daylight. But for every article demanding truth, there were two calling Rachel Kane a traitor, a fugitive, a threat to national security. No one mentioned that she had once saved entire platoons, that her name had been whispered with respect in every shadowed corridor of the SEAL community. Heroism was temporary, scandal was permanent. Still, the world had cracked open, and from that fracture, something honest began to bleed through. Mara watched it all unfold from a quiet cafe in Georgetown, sipping burnt coffee while reporters shouted on nearby screens. She kept a burner phone beside her, its only message thread labeled RC. The last message read, "Still breathing. Keep watching." She didn't delete it. Thousands of miles away, in a quiet coastal town on the edge of Maine, a woman in a dark jacket walked the docks before dawn. Her hair was shorter now, her face leaner. She moved with the careful anonymity of someone who had erased herself. Rachel rented a small boathouse under a false name. It overlooked the water, a still gray mirror stretching to the horizon. The world outside continued to argue about her, to paint her as villain or savior. But here, the ocean didn't care. Every morning she woke before sunrise, made coffee on a rusted stove, and read the old letters Marcus had sent her from deployments she'd never fully understood until now. His handwriting was steady, calm, never bitter. If I die out there, don't let them turn me into a story they can sell. Let me stay human. She folded the letters carefully, her thumb tracing the creases. You stayed human, she murmured. I almost didn't. At night, she'd walk the shoreline, the waves washing over her boots. There were no orders now, no missions, no chain of command. Just silence, and the faint hum of peace she didn't yet know how to hold. But she was still a soldier in her bones. Her war had shifted, no longer against enemies with guns, but against the ghosts that followed her through dreams, the faces of men she'd killed, the betrayal she couldn't forgive, the truth she'd unleashed. Sometimes she imagined Marcus walking beside her, not as a memory, but as a presence. He didn't speak, he never had to. Then one morning, as the sun rose over the water, Rachel found a newspaper folded on her doorstep. No one lived nearby, and she hadn't subscribed to anything. Across the front page, a headline read, "Whistleblower evidence confirms Navy SEAL cover-up. Congressional inquiry expands." Below it, smaller print, "Sources indicate internal reform teams have begun restructuring Black Ops funding oversight. Key figures to face public charges." Rachel stared at it for a long time, wind tugging at her hair. Slowly, she folded the paper in half and placed it in her duffel bag. A whisper escaped her lips, barely audible, almost to herself. "You see that, Marcus? You finally won." She sat on the dock's edge, legs dangling over the water, and watched the horizon burn gold. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to breathe without fear. The truth had cost her everything, her career, her identity, her peace. But it had also freed something inside her, a clarity that came only after you've lost everything you thought you needed to survive. Somewhere out there, the machine was still turning. New faces would take the old chairs. New lies would try to fill the void she'd torn open. But maybe, just maybe, the world would remember her not as a soldier or a traitor, but as a woman who refused to be silent. A ripple spread across the water as a gull dove for fish, breaking the morning calm. Rachel watched it disappear into the sky, then stood, slinging her bag over her shoulder. The wind carried her last words softly across the waves. Every war leaves one survivor. Today it's the truth. She walked down the pier until her figure was swallowed by mist. The sea remained, vast, eternal, indifferent, as if guarding her secret. And somewhere, deep beneath that grey horizon, the world turned a little more honest because one woman refused to bow.